I never thought I'd be thankful for a burst pipe in my kitchen, but that flood washed away the last traces of my old life and opened the door to something new. 6 months earlier, I was Emma Thompson, devoted wife and high school teacher, living what I thought was a perfect life. Then, with a single misplaced flower delivery, my world shattered. Suddenly, I was uncovering lies, confronting betrayals, and facing a future I never imagined. Through tears, sleepless nights, and moments of crippling self-doubt, I found a strength I never knew I had. But as I rebuilt my life piece by piece, I discovered that karma has a way of catching up to those who deserve it. How did a simple English teacher like me end up at the center of a scandal that would rock our entire community? I had always believed in the power of small acts of kindness. That's why, every Friday morning, I'd bring in freshly baked muffins for my high school students. It wasn't much, but seeing their sleepy faces light up as they walked into first period made my whole week worthwhile. "Good morning, class," I chirped, setting down the basket of still warm blueberry muffins on my desk. A chorus of groggy "good mornings" and the shuffling of feet greeted me as my sophomore English students filed in. "Mrs. Thompson, you're the best," Jake, one of my more outspoken students, said as he grabbed a muffin. "My mom never has time to make breakfast anymore." I smiled, feeling a twinge of sadness. So many of these kids came from broken or busy homes. It was the least I could do to start their day off right. As the bell rang and I began my lesson on To Kill a Mockingbird, I couldn't help but feel a sense of contentment. This was where I belonged, helping shape young minds and hopefully making a difference in their lives. The day flew by, as it usually did when I was in my element. Before I knew it, the final bell was ringing, and I was packing up my things to head home. As I walked to my car, I felt a flutter of excitement in my stomach. James and I had been trying for a baby for a few months now, and I had a good feeling about this time. I pulled into our driveway, admiring the neat flower beds I'd planted last spring. Our little suburban home wasn't much, but it was ours, and I loved every inch of it. As I walked in, I called out, "Honey, I'm home!" James's voice drifted from his study. "In here, Em!" I found him hunched over his desk, surrounded by stacks of papers and furiously typing away on his laptop. My husband, the dedicated accountant. I wrapped my arms around his shoulders and kissed the top of his head. "How was your day?" I asked, breathing in the familiar scent of his cologne. He turned and gave me a quick peck on the lips. "Busy as always. Tax season's coming up. You know how it is." I nodded, understanding all too well. This time of year was always hectic for James, but I admired his work ethic. "Well, don't work too hard. I'm going to start dinner. Lasagna sound good?" "Sounds perfect," he replied with a smile. "I'll be down in a bit." As I prepared dinner, humming along to the radio, I couldn't help but feel grateful for the life James and I had built together. 10 years of marriage had its ups and downs, but we'd weathered them all. Now, with the possibility of a baby on the horizon, everything felt like it was falling into place. Over dinner, James and I chatted about our days. I told him about Jake and the muffins, and he shared a funny story about a client who had tried to claim his dog as a dependent on his taxes. "Oh, before I forget," James said between bites, "I might have to work late a few nights next week. We've got a big client coming in, and the boss wants everything perfect." I felt a small pang of disappointment but pushed it aside. "That's okay. I understand. Just don't forget to eat, okay? I worry about you when you work those long hours." He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "What did I do to deserve you, Em?" I laughed and squeezed back. "Just lucky, I guess." Later that night, as we lay in bed, I curled up against James's side. "I love you," I whispered. "I love you too," he murmured, already half asleep. As I drifted off, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything in my life was just right. I had a job I loved, a husband who adored me, and the promise of a family on the horizon. Little did I know, my perfect world was about to be turned upside down. The first time I noticed something was off, I brushed it aside. It was such a small thing, after all. James and I were having breakfast together, a rare treat given his busy schedule. I was buttering my toast when I heard the familiar ping of his phone. "Everything okay?" I asked, noticing the slight frown on his face as he read the message. "Oh, yeah," he said, quickly putting the phone face down on the table. "Just work stuff." I nodded, not thinking much of it, but then I saw the corners of his mouth twitch upwards as he picked up the phone again, his thumbs flying over the keyboard. "I must be some funny work stuff," I teased. He looked up, a flash of something crossing his face before he smiled. "Just Dave being Dave. You know how he is." I did know. Dave was James's co-worker, always cracking jokes. Still, something about James's reaction felt off. Over the next few days, I started noticing it more. James was always on his phone, smiling at the screen, chuckling at messages. It wasn't like him. He'd never been much for texting before. One evening, I was grading papers in the living room when James came in from work. He kissed me on the cheek, then immediately pulled out his phone. "How was your day?" I asked, trying to engage him in conversation. "Fine," he mumbled, not looking up from the screen. I watched him for a moment, noticing how his eyes crinkled at the corners as he read whatever was on his phone. It was the same look he used to give me when we first started dating. "Who are you texting?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. He glanced up, looking startled. "No one. Just checking emails." I raised an eyebrow. "Must be some funny emails." He shrugged, pocketing his phone. "Just office banter. Nothing interesting." But I couldn't shake the feeling that it was something more. James had never been this attached to his phone before. And since when did office banter make him smile like that? The next morning, I woke up to find James's side of the bed empty. Frowning, I padded downstairs, following the sound of his voice. He was in the kitchen, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in low, hushed tones. "I can't talk now," I heard him say. "I'll call you later." He hung up quickly when he saw me enter the room. "Morning, Em," he said, his voice a little too bright. "I was just checking in with the office. Early meeting today." I nodded slowly, not quite believing him. "Want me to make you some breakfast before you go?" "No time," he said, grabbing his briefcase. "I'll grab something on the way." He kissed me quickly on the cheek and was out the door before I could say another word. I stood in the kitchen, feeling a knot form in my stomach. This wasn't like James at all. That evening, I was determined to talk to him about it, but when he got home, he barely said hello before disappearing into the bathroom with his phone. I heard the lock click, something he'd never done before. I stood outside the door, my hand raised to knock, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. What would I even say? "Hey, honey, why are you suddenly obsessed with your phone?" It sounded paranoid, even in my head. But as the days went on, I couldn't ignore the changes. James was distant, always distracted. Our conversations became shorter, more superficial, and always, that damn phone was in his hand. One night, I woke up to find James wasn't in bed. I crept downstairs and found him in the living room, the blue glow of his phone illuminating his face in the darkness. He was smiling at whatever he was reading, that soft, intimate smile that used to be just for me. I cleared my throat and he jumped, nearly dropping the phone. "Emma, what are you doing up?" "I could ask you the same thing," I said, my voice shakier than I wanted it to be. He fumbled for an excuse. "I just couldn't sleep. Thought I'd catch up on some work emails." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. As I turned to go back upstairs, I caught a glimpse of his screen. It wasn't his work email. It was a chat app I'd never seen before. That night, as I lay awake listening to James's steady breathing beside me, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. The man lying next to me suddenly felt like a stranger. And for the first time in our marriage, I found myself wondering what secrets that stranger might be keeping. As the days turned into weeks, the knot in my stomach grew tighter. James's behavior wasn't just odd anymore. It was downright suspicious. The late nights at work, the secretive phone calls, the constant texting. It all added up to something I didn't want to face. One morning, as I was pouring my coffee, James rushed past me, grabbing his keys. "Gotta run, Em. Big project at work." "But it's Saturday," I said, frowning. He paused for a split second, and I saw something flicker in his eyes. Guilt? "Yeah, we're behind schedule. Might be gone all day." Before I could respond, he was out the door. I stood there, coffee forgotten, feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. Since when did accountants work all day on Saturdays? I tried to distract myself with housework, but my mind kept wandering. I found myself in our bedroom, staring at James's dresser. His cologne caught my eye, the expensive one I'd bought him for Christmas. The bottle was nearly empty. Strange, considering he'd barely worn it before. As I was putting it back, I noticed something else. His gym bag was missing. James hadn't been to the gym in years, always complaining he was too busy. So why was it gone now? That evening, when he finally came home, I was waiting in the living room. "How was work?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Exhausting," he sighed, not meeting my eyes. "I'm beat. Think I'll turn in early." As he headed upstairs, I caught a whiff of his cologne. My heart sank. He'd never wear cologne to work on a Saturday. The next week, I found myself watching James like a hawk. I noticed things I'd been blind to before. How he'd step outside to take phone calls. How he'd angle his body away from me when texting. How he'd clear his browser history every night. One evening, as we were watching TV, his phone buzzed. He grabbed it quickly, but not before I saw the name on the screen. Lisa. I didn't know any Lisa. "Who's Lisa?" I asked, trying to sound casual. James stiffened beside me. "New client," he said quickly. "Big account, gotta take this." He left the room, his voice a low murmur from the kitchen. When he came back, I pretended to be engrossed in the show, but inside, I was screaming. A client calling at 9 p.m.? On his personal phone. Who was he kidding? The final straw came a few days later. I was doing laundry when I found a receipt in James's pocket. It was for a fancy restaurant downtown, one we'd always talked about trying but could never afford. The date was last Tuesday, a night he'd told me he was working late. My hands shook as I stared at the paper. 2 entrees, 2 glasses of wine. This wasn't a business dinner. This was a date. That night, I lay awake, listening to James's steady breathing beside me. The man I'd loved for 10 years, the man I thought I knew better than anyone, suddenly felt like a stranger. I wanted to shake him awake, to demand answers, to scream and cry and ask why, but I didn't, because deep down I was terrified of what those answers might be. The next morning, I watched James get ready for work. He hummed as he knotted his tie, a cheerful tune that felt like a mockery of my pain. I might be late again tonight," he said casually. "Don't wait up." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. As soon as the door closed behind him, I broke down. Tears streamed down my face as I hugged myself, trying to hold together the pieces of my shattering world. When I finally pulled myself together, I knew what I had to do. No more burying my head in the sand. No more pretending everything was fine. I needed answers, and I was going to get them. I called in sick to work, something I never did. Then I sat down at our computer and opened up our phone bill. With shaking hands, I scrolled through James's call log. One number kept appearing, over and over. Late night calls, some lasting hours. My heart pounded as I copied the number into a reverse lookup website. The results loaded, and I felt like I'd been doused in ice water. Lisa Anderson. The name stared back at me from the screen, mocking me. So Lisa was real, and she definitely wasn't a client. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at that name. My mind raced through every possibility, every scenario. Was James really? Could he actually be? I couldn't even bring myself to think the word. But as the shock wore off, another emotion took its place. Anger, white hot, righteous anger. How dare he? How dare he lie to me, betray me, make a fool of me in my own home? I stood up, my hands clenched into fists. Enough was enough. I was done being the clueless, trusting wife. It was time to take control. It was time to find out the truth, no matter how much it might hurt. As I grabbed my car keys, I caught sight of myself in the hallway mirror. The woman staring back at me wasn't the happy, carefree Emma of a few weeks ago. This Emma had steel in her eyes and determination in her jaw. This Emma was ready for a fight. "Game on, James," I whispered to my reflection, half expecting to find jewelry for another woman. Instead, I found a burner phone. My hands shook as I turned it on. It was password protected, of course. I tried his birthday, our anniversary, even his favorite sports team's founding year. Nothing worked. Frustrated, I put it back exactly where I found it. This was far from over. Next, I moved to his home office. I booted up his computer, grateful that I knew his password, or at least, I thought I did. When I typed in our wedding date, the familiar error message popped up. He'd changed it. Of course he had. I slumped in his chair, fighting back tears. How had it come to this? Me, sneaking around my own house like a thief, trying to hack into my husband's computer. This wasn't me. This wasn't us. But then I remembered the late-night calls, the secret texts, the lies about working late. My resolve hardened. I had to know the truth. I turned my attention to his desk drawers. Bills, the old receipts, nothing out of the ordinary. Until I reached the bottom drawer. There, tucked under a stack of old tax returns, was a small leather-bound notebook. My heart pounded as I opened it. Inside were dates, times, and initials. L.A. 7:30 p.m. Chez Pierre. One entry read. The same restaurant from the receipt I'd found. I flipped through more pages. Dozens of entries, all following the same pattern. Dates, times, initials, locations. I felt sick. This wasn't just a one-time thing. This was ongoing, planned, deliberate. How long had this been going on? Weeks, months, years. I was so absorbed in the notebook that I almost missed the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. Panic shot through me as I realized James was home, probably for lunch, as he sometimes did. I shoved the notebook back into the drawer and raced out of the office, my heart pounding. I made it to the kitchen just as the front door opened. "Emma?" James called out. "You home?" I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "In the kitchen," I called back, trying to sound normal. He walked in, surprise on his face. "Shouldn't you be at work?" I forced a smile. "Wasn't feeling well this morning. Decided to take a sick day." He nodded, but I saw a flicker of something, suspicion, in his eyes. "Well, I just came home to grab some files I forgot. I'll be heading right back out." "Okay," I said, watching as he headed to his office. I held my breath, praying I'd put everything back exactly as I'd found it. A few minutes later, he emerged, briefcase in hand. "Feel better?" he said, giving me a quick peck on the cheek before heading out. As soon as the door closed behind him, I sagged against the counter, my legs weak with relief. That had been too close, but I couldn't stop now. I needed more evidence. I needed to be sure. That afternoon, I made a decision I never thought I'd make. I drove to a small electronics store on the outskirts of town and bought a small, discreet camera, the kind cheating spouses always use in those trashy daytime TV shows. I felt dirty just touching it. "For home security," I lied when the clerk asked, not meeting his eyes. Back at home, I set up the camera in our bedroom, angling it to capture most of the room. My hands shook as I tested it, making sure it was working properly. This felt like a violation, an invasion of privacy, but hadn't James already violated our marriage with his lies? As I finished setting everything up, a wave of exhaustion hit me. This wasn't who I was. I wasn't a suspicious, paranoid wife. I was Emma Thompson, high school English teacher, loving wife, future mother. Or at least, I used to be. I caught sight of myself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back at me. Dark circles under my eyes, hair a mess, a haunted look on my face. Was this what James's betrayal had reduced me to? But as I looked closer, I saw something else in my reflection. Determination, strength. I might be hurt, I might be scared, but I wasn't broken. Not yet. You can do this, Emma, I whispered to myself. You deserve the truth. As I heard James's car pull into the driveway, I took a deep breath and steeled myself. It was time to put on the performance of my life. I had to act normal, pretend everything was fine, because the real investigation was just beginning. Little did I know, this was only the tip of the iceberg. The days ahead would test me in ways I never imagined. But I was ready to fight for the truth, ready to fight for my marriage, ready to fight for myself. Let the games begin, James. Let the games begin. The next few days were a blur of anxiety and frustration. I felt like a spy in my own home, constantly on edge, watching James's every move. But despite my best efforts, concrete proof remained elusive. The camera I'd set up in our bedroom revealed nothing incriminating. Just James coming in late, looking tired, and falling asleep almost immediately. No secret phone calls, no suspicious behavior. It was almost disappointing in a twisted way. I tried to access his phone whenever I could, but he guarded it like a hawk. Even when he was in the shower, it was always with him. The few times I managed to get my hands on it, it was locked tight. I tried every combination I could think of, but nothing worked. One evening, as we were getting ready for bed, I decided to try a more direct approach. "Hey, honey," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "Can I borrow your phone? Mine's dead and I wanted to check my email." James froze for a split second before recovering. "Sorry, Em. Left it downstairs charging. Why don't you use the iPad instead?" I nodded, forcing a smile. Another lie. I'd seen him slip his phone into his pocket just minutes ago. The next day, I decided to take a different tack. During my free period at school, I drove to James's office. I told the receptionist I was surprising my husband with lunch. She smiled and waved me through. My heart pounded as I approached James's office. What would I find? Him with another woman, secret documents. But when I opened the door, I found nothing. Just an empty office, James's jacket hanging on the back of his chair. "Oh, Mrs. Thompson!" A voice behind me made me jump. I turned to see Dave, James's co-worker. "James just stepped out for a client meeting. Can I help you with something?" I fumbled for an excuse. "Oh, I just wanted to surprise him with lunch. Guess I should have called first." "Huh?" Dave laughed. "That's James for you. Always running off to meetings. Been happening a lot lately, actually. Must be landing some big accounts." I nodded, my mind racing. So James really was having a lot of meetings lately. But were they really for work? Back at home, I felt like I was going crazy. Every instinct told me James was hiding something, but I had no proof, nothing concrete to confront him with. That night, as we ate dinner in silence, I couldn't take it anymore. "James," I said, putting down my fork, "and is everything okay? With us, I mean." He looked up, surprise on his face. "Of course. Why wouldn't it be?" I took a deep breath. "You've just been distant lately, working late a lot. I barely see you anymore." For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of guilt in his eyes, but it was gone so quickly, I might have imagined it. "I'm sorry, Em," he said, reaching across the table to take my hand. "Work's just been crazy lately. You know how it is during tax season." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Another lie. Tax season was months away. The next day, I took a step I never thought I'd take. I hired a private investigator. The woman, a no-nonsense type named Carol, listened to my story without judgment. "I'll need a few days to gather information," she said. "In the meantime, act normal. Don't give him any reason to be suspicious. Act normal." If only she knew how impossible that felt. For the next few days, I went through the motions of my life like a robot. I taught my classes, made dinner, watched TV with James, but inside, I was screaming. Every moment felt like a lie. One afternoon, I received a text from Carol. Check your email, sending preliminary findings. With shaking hands, I opened my inbox. There, in stark black and white, were photos. James entering a hotel. James at a restaurant, sitting across from a blonde woman. James and the woman, holding hands in a park. I stared at the images, feeling like I was going to be sick. There it was, proof. The proof I'd been searching for. The proof I'd been dreading. That night, as James came home late again, I watched him with new eyes. How could he do this? How could he come home to me, kiss me, sleep next to me, all while carrying on with another woman? I wanted to confront him, to scream and yell and demand answers. But Carol's words echoed in my mind. Don't give him any reason to be suspicious. So I swallowed my anger, my hurt, my betrayal. How was your day? I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. Same old, he replied, not meeting my eyes. How about you? Oh, you know, I said, fighting to keep my voice from shaking. Just another day. If only he knew. If only he knew that this day had changed everything. That nothing would ever be the same again. As I lay in bed that night, listening to James's steady breathing beside me, I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront him. Not yet. I needed more. More evidence, more information. I needed to understand the full extent of his betrayal before I made my next move. Because one thing was certain. There would be a next move. And when it came, James wouldn't know what hit him. The next few weeks were the hardest of my life. Every day felt like a battle. Trying to keep up the facade of normalcy while my world was crumbling around me. I'd wake up next to James, kiss him goodbye as he left for work, all the while knowing he was going to meet her. The blonde woman from the photos, Lisa. I became obsessed with gathering more evidence. I started keeping a detailed log of James's comings and goings, late nights at the office, weekend, work emergencies, sudden client meetings. I recorded it all. The list grew longer every day, each entry another nail in the coffin of our marriage. One evening, as James was in the shower, I finally managed to get my hands on his phone. My heart raced as I tried to unlock it. On a whim, I typed in Lisa's birthday. I'd found it during my online stalking. The phone unlocked. I felt a surge of triumph, quickly followed by nausea. Of course he'd use her birthday. Of course. With shaking hands, I scrolled through his messages. There it was, a conversation with L. Asim, my eyes skimmed over words of love, of passion, of a future together. I wanted to throw up. Instead, I quickly forwarded the entire conversation to myself before deleting the sent email. Evidence secured. As the days passed, I found myself becoming someone I didn't recognize. I was paranoid, constantly checking James's location on my phone, analyzing every word he said for hidden meanings. I started drinking more than I should, just to numb the pain for a few hours. My best friend, Sarah, noticed the change in me. Emma, what's going on? She asked one day over coffee. You seem off. I wanted to tell her everything, to pour out all my pain and anger. But I couldn't, not yet. Just stressed about work, I lied, hating myself for it. The final straw came on what should have been a happy day, our anniversary. I'd been holding on to a sliver of hope that maybe, just maybe, James would remember. That he'd show some sign that our marriage still meant something to him. But the day came and went without a word from him. No card, no flowers, not even a text. He came home late, as usual, with some excuse about a client emergency. As I lay in bed that night, listening to James's steady breathing beside me, something inside me snapped. I couldn't do this anymore. I couldn't keep pretending. Couldn't keep living this lie. The next morning, I called in sick to work. As soon as James left, I sprang into action. I dug out every piece of evidence I'd collected, the photos, the text logs, the emails. I spread them out on our dining room table, a damning tableau of betrayal. Then I did something I'd been avoiding for weeks. I called my parents. Mom, I said, my voice breaking as soon as she answered, "I need you." An hour later, my mom was at my door, concern etched on her face. I broke down as soon as I saw her, sobbing in her arms like a child. When I finally calmed down enough to speak, I told her everything. The late nights, the secretive behavior, the other woman. I showed her the evidence spread out on the table. My mom listened in silence, her face growing darker with each revelation. When I finished, she pulled me into another hug. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of strength. Having my mom there, knowing I wasn't alone in this, gave me the courage I needed to take the next step. "I need to confront him," I said, wiping my eyes. "I can't live like this anymore." My mom nodded, a fierce look in her eyes. "You're right, and I'll be right here with you when you do." We spent the rest of the day planning. I knew James would be home late. He always was on Fridays. It would give us time to prepare. As evening approached, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The weeks of anxiety and uncertainty were over. Tonight, one way or another, everything would change. I heard James's key in the lock just after 9 p.m. My mom squeezed my hand and retreated to the kitchen, out of sight but within earshot. "Emma?" James called out as he entered. "You home?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. "In the dining room," I called back, my voice steadier than I expected. I heard his footsteps approaching, then a sharp intake of breath as he entered the room and saw the evidence spread out on the table. "What's all this?" he asked, his voice tight. I looked up at him, meeting his eyes for what felt like the first time in months. "I think you know exactly what this is, James." He stared at the table, his face pale. "Emma, I can explain?" "Explain." I cut him off, my voice rising. "Explain what, James? Explain how you've been lying to me for months. Explain how you've been sneaking around with another woman. Explain how you forgot our anniversary because you were too busy with her." James stumbled back, shock written all over his face. How did I know?" I stood up, anger giving me strength. "I'm not stupid, James. Did you really think I wouldn't figure it out?" He reached for me, but I stepped back. "Emma, please, let me explain. It's not what you think." "Not what I think," I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "So these photos of you with another woman, these texts, these emails, they're all just a big misunderstanding." James's face crumpled. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." But it was too late for sorry, too late for explanations or excuses. As I stood there, facing the man who had betrayed me in the worst possible way, I felt something shift inside me. The pain and confusion of the past weeks crystallized into a hard, cold resolve. "I want a divorce," I said, my voice calm and clear. And in that moment, as I watched the realization dawn on James's face, I knew this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. The next few days passed in a blur. After my confrontation with James, everything seemed to move in slow motion. He moved out that night, staying with a friend, he said. I didn't care where he went, as long as it wasn't here. My mom stayed with me, a constant source of support as I navigated this new, painful reality. She helped me make calls to a divorce lawyer, to my principal to request some time off, to our joint bank to freeze our shared accounts. Each call felt like another nail in the coffin of my marriage, but also a step towards reclaiming my life. One morning, as I sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at my untouched coffee, my mom placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Emma, sweetie," she said softly, "I know it hurts, but you need to eat something." I looked up at her, tears welling in my eyes. How did I not see it, Mom? How could I have been so blind? She sat down next to me, taking my hands in hers. "This isn't your fault, Emma. James made his choices. You trusted him because that's what you do in a marriage. He's the one who broke that trust." I nodded, wiping away my tears. "I just feel so stupid." You're not stupid, my mom said firmly. You're strong. Stronger than you know, and you're going to get through this. As the days passed, I slowly started to emerge from my fog of grief and shock. I returned to work, throwing myself into my teaching with renewed vigor. My students became my lifeline, their energy and enthusiasm a welcome distraction from the chaos of my personal life. One afternoon, as I was grading papers in my classroom, there was a knock at the door. I looked up to see Sarah, my best friend, standing there with a concerned look on her face. "Hey," she said softly. "Got a minute?" I nodded, gesturing for her to come in. She sat down across from me, her eyes full of worry. "Emma, what's going on? You've been so distant lately. And now I hear rumors that you and James have split up." I took a deep breath, then told her everything. The late nights, the suspicious behavior, the other woman. Sarah listened in shocked silence, her face growing angrier with each revelation. When I finished, she reached across the desk and squeezed my hand. "Oh, Emma, I'm so sorry. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I could have been there for you." I shrugged, feeling tears prick at my eyes again. I was embarrassed, I guess, ashamed. I didn't want anyone to know what a fool I'd been. "You're not a fool," Sarah said fiercely. "James is the fool for throwing away what he had with you. You're amazing, Emma. And you deserve so much better than this." Her words warmed something inside me, a spark of self-worth I thought I'd lost. "Thanks, Sarah," I whispered. That evening, as I was leaving school, I ran into Jake, one of my students. He looked at me with concern. "Mrs. Thompson, are you okay? You seem sad lately?" His innocent observation caught me off guard. I thought I'd been hiding my pain better than that. "I'm okay, Jake," I said, forcing a smile. "Just going through some personal stuff." He nodded sagely, as only a teenager can. "My parents got divorced last year," he said. "It sucked at first, but it got better. They're both happier now." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. In all my pain and anger, I hadn't considered the possibility that this could lead to something better, that I could be happier without James. As I drove home, Jake's words echoed in my mind. Could I be happier without James? The thought seemed impossible. He'd been such a huge part of my life for so long, but then I remembered the weeks of lying, the betrayal, the pain he'd put me through. Maybe I could be happier without him. When I got home, I found a bouquet of flowers on my doorstep. My heart leapt for a moment, thinking they might be from James. But the card read, "Thinking of you. Stay strong. Love." Sarah and the other teachers. The simple gesture of support from my colleagues brought fresh tears to my eyes. But these weren't tears of sadness or self-pity. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. I brought the flowers inside, arranging them in a vase on the kitchen counter. As I stepped back to admire them, I caught sight of my reflection in the window. The woman staring back at me looked tired, yes, but there was something else there too. A determination in her eyes, a set to her jaw that hadn't been there before. In that moment, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let James's betrayal define me. I wasn't going to let it break me. I was going to use this pain, this anger, as fuel to rebuild my life, to rediscover who I was without James. I picked up my phone and called my lawyer. "I want to move forward with the divorce," I said, my voice steady. "And I want to fight for everything I'm entitled to." As I hung up, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For weeks, I'd been reacting to James's actions, always on the defensive. But now, I was taking control. I was fighting back. That night, as I lay in bed, I didn't cry myself to sleep for the first time since discovering James's affair. Instead, I found myself making plans. Plans for my future, a future without James. It wouldn't be easy, I knew that. There would still be hard days ahead. Days when the pain would feel overwhelming. But as I drifted off to sleep, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Hope for a new beginning. Hope for a life rebuilt on my own terms. And for the first time in weeks, I slept peacefully, dreaming of the possibilities that lay ahead. The day of the confrontation finally arrived. I'd been preparing for this moment for weeks, but nothing could have truly readied me for the emotional storm I was about to face. I woke up early that morning, my stomach in knots. I'd asked James to come over to talk things through. He didn't know that I had all the evidence laid out on the dining room table, ready to expose his lies once and for all. As I waited for him to arrive, I paced the living room, rehearsing what I wanted to say in my head. My mom had offered to be here, but I declined. This was something I needed to do on my own. The doorbell rang at exactly 10 a.m. Trust James to be punctual for this, of all things. I took a deep breath, steeling myself, and opened the door. "Emma," he said, a tentative smile on his face. "Thanks for agreeing to talk." I didn't return his smile. "Come in," I said, my voice cold. I led him to the dining room, watching his face carefully as he took in the spread of evidence on the table. "What's all this?" he asked, his voice tight with barely concealed panic. I sat down at the table, gesturing for him to do the same. "This, James, is the truth. The truth you've been hiding from me for months." His eyes darted over the photos, the printed emails, the phone records. I saw the moment realization dawned on him. There was no way out of this. No more lies he could tell. "Emma, I can explain," he started, but I cut him off. "Explain?" I said, my voice rising. "Explain what, exactly? How you've been lying to me for months. How you've been sneaking around with another woman behind my back. How you forgot our anniversary because you were too busy with her." James's face crumpled. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." But his apology only fueled my anger. "Sorry?" I spat. "You're sorry? Sorry doesn't cut it, James. Sorry doesn't erase what you've done." I picked up one of the photos, showing him with the blonde woman, Lisa, at a restaurant. "Who is she?" I demanded. James hesitated, then sighed in defeat. "Her name is Lisa. She works at my office." "And how long has this been going on?" He wouldn't meet my eyes. 6 months, he mumbled. The words hit me like a physical blow. 6 months. Half a year of lies, of betrayal. I felt like I couldn't breathe. "Why?" I managed to choke out. "Why her? Why wasn't I enough?" James ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I used to find endearing. Now it just made me sick. "It's not that you weren't enough, Emma. I don't know. Things with Lisa just happened. I never meant for it to go this far." I laughed bitterly. "Things just happened. For 6 months. Do you expect me to believe that?" He reached across the table, trying to take my hand, but I jerked away. "Emma, please, I love you. We can work through this. We can go to counseling. We can—" "No," I cut him off, my voice firm. "There's no we anymore, James. You made sure of that when you decided to cheat on me." I stood up, gathering the evidence into a folder. "I've already talked to a lawyer. You'll be hearing from them soon about the divorce proceedings." James's face went pale. "Divorce? Emma, no, please. We can fix this. I'll do anything." For a moment, I faltered. A small part of me, the part that still loved the man I thought James was, wanted to give in. But then I remembered all the lies, all the pain he'd put me through. I remembered my own worth. "It's too late for that," I said, my voice steady. "You had your chance to do the right thing, James. You had 6 months of chances. But you chose to lie, to cheat, to betray everything we built together." I walked to the front door, opening it. "I think you should leave now." James stood, his shoulders slumped in defeat. As he passed me, he paused. "I really am sorry. Emma, I never wanted to hurt you." I looked him in the eye, seeing the man I'd loved for the last time. "But you did hurt me, James, and now you have to live with that." As the door closed behind him, I leaned against it, sliding down to the floor. The emotions I'd been holding back flooded out, and I sobbed. great heaving cries that shook my whole body. I don't know how long I sat there crying out all the pain and anger and betrayal. But eventually, the tears subsided, and I felt lighter, like I'd purged something toxic from my system. I stood up on shaky legs and walked to the bathroom. The woman in the mirror looked tired, her eyes red and puffy from crying. But there was something else there too. A strength, a determination I hadn't seen in a long time. I splashed some cold water on my face and took a deep breath. This wasn't the end, I realized. It was a beginning. A chance to rediscover who I was without James. To build a life on my own terms. As I walked back to the living room, my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "How did it go? Are you okay?" I smiled, feeling a rush of gratitude for my friend's support. "It's over," I texted back. "And I think I'm going to be okay." And for the first time in months, I actually believed it. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. I knew that. There would be more tears, more pain to work through, but I was ready to face it, ready to fight for myself, for my happiness. As I looked around the house that had once been ours, I made a decision. It was time for a change. Time to create a space that was truly mine. Starting tomorrow, I'd redecorate. Make this house a reflection of the new Emma I was becoming. The confrontation was over, the truth was out, and I was ready to start the next chapter of my life. A chapter where I was the author, not just a character in someone else's story. The days following my confrontation with James were a roller coaster of emotions. One moment I'd feel empowered and ready to take on the world. The next I'd be curled up in bed, unable to face the day. But slowly, surely, I started to find my footing in this new reality. My mom stayed with me for a week, her presence a comforting anchor as I navigated the choppy waters of my new life. She helped me sort through James's things, packing them up for him to collect. Each item we packed felt like letting go of a piece of my old life, but also like reclaiming my space. "You don't have to do this all at once, sweetie," Mom said one afternoon as we sorted through photo albums. "It's okay to take your time." I nodded, wiping away a stray tear as I closed an album from our honeymoon. "I know, Mom, but I need to do this. I need to move forward." The first weekend after James moved out, Sarah showed up at my door with paint swatches and a determined look in her eye. "Time for a change," she announced, marching into the house. We spent the weekend repainting the bedroom, transforming it from the soft beige James and I had chosen together to a bold, vibrant blue. As we worked, Sarah kept me laughing with her terrible singing and even worse jokes. By Sunday evening, as we stood back to admire our handiwork, I felt a spark of excitement for the first time in weeks. "It's perfect," I said, smiling at my friend. "Thank you, Sarah, for everything." She pulled me into a hug. "That's what friends are for. Now, let's order some pizza and celebrate your new room." Returning to work was another hurdle. I'd taken a few weeks off to deal with the immediate aftermath of the divorce announcement, but now it was time to face my colleagues and students again. As I walked into the staff room that first morning back, conversations hushed. I could feel the weight of curious and pitying glances. But before the awkwardness could become unbearable, my department head, Mr. Johnson, stepped forward. "Welcome back, Emma," he said warmly. "We've missed you, and the coffee machine's been acting up again. Only you seem to have the magic touch with it." His casual comment broke the tension, and soon I was surrounded by colleagues offering genuine words of support and welcome. It wasn't easy, but it was a start. My students, bless them, were a mix of curious and supportive. I overheard whispers about Mrs. Thompson's divorce in the hallways, but in class, they were mostly just glad to have me back. One day, as I was packing up after class, Jake, the student who had told me about his parents' divorce, hung back. "Mrs. Thompson?" he said hesitantly. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry about your divorce. And, well, if you ever need someone to talk to who gets it, I'm here." His earnest offer brought tears to my eyes. "Thank you, Jake," I managed to say. That means a lot. As the weeks passed, I slowly started to rediscover myself. I joined a yoga class, something I'd always wanted to try, but James had never been interested in. I started reading again, losing myself in books in a way I hadn't done since college. I even signed up for a creative writing workshop, surprising myself with the stories that poured out of me. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were still nights when the loneliness felt overwhelming, when I'd reach for James in bed only to remember he wasn't there. There were moments when a happy couple walking down the street would make my heart ache with remembered joy and fresh pain. One particularly bad day, I found myself sitting in my car in the school parking lot, unable to stop crying. I was about to call in sick when there was a tap on my window. It was Mr. Johnson. "Rough day?" he asked gently as I rolled down the window. I nodded, too choked up to speak. "Why don't you take a personal day?" he suggested. "I'll cover your classes. Sometimes we all need a day to just be kind to ourselves." His understanding and kindness broke something open inside me. I spent that day on my couch, alternating between crying and sleeping, letting myself feel all the grief and anger I'd been trying to push down. But the next morning, I woke up feeling lighter, like I'd purged something toxic from my system. I got up, made myself a cup of coffee, and stood by the window, watching the sun rise. For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope for the future. That weekend, I did something I'd been putting off for weeks. I changed my relationship status on social media and posted a simple message, starting a new chapter. Thank you to everyone who supported me through this difficult time. The outpouring of love and support in the comments section was overwhelming. Friends I hadn't spoken to in years reached out, offering words of encouragement and sharing their own stories of overcoming heartbreak. As I read through the messages, I felt a shift inside me. Yes, my marriage had ended. Yes, James had betrayed me in the worst possible way. But I wasn't alone. I had friends, family, colleagues, even students who cared about me. And more importantly, I had myself. I opened up a new document on my computer and started typing. At the top, I wrote Emma's new chapter and began listing goals for myself. Small things at first, try a new recipe each week, take a weekend trip somewhere I'd never been. But as I wrote, bigger dreams started to emerge. Go back to school for my master's degree, write that novel I'd always talked about, maybe even travel to Europe one day. As I looked at my list, I felt a surge of excitement. For the first time since discovering James's affair, I was looking forward to the future instead of dreading it. Yes, there would still be hard days ahead. Yes, the pain of betrayal would take time to heal fully, but I was on my way. I was reclaiming my life, one small step at a time. I saved the document and closed my laptop, feeling a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. Tomorrow was a new day, the first day of my new chapter, and I was ready to start writing it. I never thought I'd be grateful for a burst pipe, but life has a funny way of surprising you. It was a Saturday morning, about 6 months after my confrontation with James, when I woke up to the sound of water rushing where it shouldn't be. My kitchen was flooded, water seeping into the living room carpet. After the initial panic and frantic calls to the plumber, I found myself sitting on my front steps, waiting for help to arrive. That's when I saw him, my new neighbor, Mike, walking his dog. "Everything okay?" he called out, noticing my distressed state. Before I knew it, I was pouring out my plumbing woes to this virtual stranger. Mike listened sympathetically, then offered to help move furniture and salvage what he could. His kindness caught me off guard, reminding me that there were still good people in the world. As we worked together, mopping up water and moving soggy boxes, we got to talking. Mike was a high school science teacher, recently moved to the area after his own divorce. There was something comforting about talking to someone who understood what I'd been through. "It gets better," he said as we took a break, sipping the coffee he'd run home to make. "I know it doesn't feel like it now, but it does." I nodded, surprised to find I actually believed him. For the first time in months, I felt a flutter of something in my chest. Not quite attraction, but possibility. The plumber eventually arrived, fixing the burst pipe and leaving me with a hefty bill. But as I surveyed the damage, I realized something. This was an opportunity. The flooded kitchen I'd always hated could now be remodeled into something I loved. That incident became a turning point. I threw myself into renovating my house, transforming it room by room into a space that was truly mine. Every paint color, every piece of furniture was a choice I made for myself, not compromising for anyone else's taste. At work, things were looking up too. Mr. Johnson approached me about taking on some additional responsibilities, including mentoring new teachers. "You've shown incredible resilience and growth this year, Emma," he said. "We could use more of that around here." His words gave me a boost of confidence I didn't realize I needed. I threw myself into the new role, finding joy in helping younger teachers navigate the challenges of the job. One day, as I was leaving school, I ran into Jake, the student who had offered his support during my divorce. He was graduating soon, and I felt a surge of pride seeing the confident young man he'd become. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, "I just wanted to thank you. Your strength during your divorce. It helped me understand what my mom went through. I've been trying to be more supportive of her." His words brought tears to my eyes. I'd been so focused on my own pain, I hadn't realized the impact my actions might have on others. "Thank you, Jake," I said. "That means more than you know." As the months passed, I found myself smiling more, laughing easier. I started saying yes to things I'd always been too scared or too busy to try before. I joined a book club, took a pottery class. I even tried my hand at salsa dancing with hilariously uncoordinated results. One evening, as I was grading papers, my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Turn on the news," it read. Curious, I flipped on the TV to see a familiar face, James. He was being led out of his office in handcuffs, his head bowed. The news anchor was talking about embezzlement, fraud, years of cooking the books. I sat there, stunned, as the story unfolded. My first instinct was to feel sorry for him. Despite everything, a part of me still cared. But then I realized this wasn't my problem anymore. James had made his choices, and now he was facing the consequences. I turned off the TV and went back to my grading, feeling a strange sense of closure. The man I'd married, the man I thought I knew, had been a lie. But I had built a new life for myself, a life I was proud of. The next day at school, I could feel the whispers, see the sidelong glances. Everyone had seen the news. But instead of shrinking away, I held my head high. I wasn't James's wife anymore. I was Emma Thompson, respected teacher, mentor, friend. After school, I found a bouquet of flowers on my desk with a note from Mr. Johnson and the other teachers. "We're lucky to have you," it read. I felt a lump in my throat as I read it, overwhelmed by the support of my colleagues. That evening, as I was tending to my new garden, another post-divorce project, Mike came by with his dog. "Heard about your ex," he said cautiously. "You okay?" I thought about it for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah," I said, surprised to find I meant it. "I really am." We stood there in comfortable silence, watching the sunset. And as the sky turned from blue to pink to purple, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. This wasn't the life I had planned, but it was a good life. A life I had built for myself, brick by brick, choice by choice. As Mike and his dog said goodbye and headed home, I took one last look at the sunset. Tomorrow was a new day, full of possibilities, and for the first time in a long time, I couldn't wait to see what it would bring. That night, as I got ready for bed, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. The woman looking back at me wasn't the same one who had discovered her husband's betrayal all those months ago. This woman was stronger, wiser, more confident. She had been through hell and come out the other side, not unscathed, but unbroken. I smiled at my reflection, feeling a surge of pride. "You did it, Emma," I whispered to myself. "You really did it." And as I drifted off to sleep, I felt nothing but gratitude for the journey that had brought me here. The road hadn't been easy, but it had led me to exactly where I needed to be.